Hey guys, welcome to the follow-up on this FATA P22 radio. So if you recall, in our last video, we were talking about this capacitive reactance and how we were going to reduce the line voltage down so that the radio works correctly. And that's what we're going to show you today. So first of all, here's all the fallen soldiers. So I've replaced all the capacitors that are bad. Here's a couple of pair of 100s here. The actual on-off switch was also bad, so I replaced that. And this is a 500 meg switch with power on and off. And we've got a couple of out-of-tolerance dog bone resistors and a couple of capacitors there. So that's been replaced. So here's what we have. We have our rectifier tube right here. Here's our fan capacitor, which is providing our line voltage, droppage. And then here's our filter caps. And what I have on here is I have one of these vector sockets. This is not the same one that we're using here, but I have two of these. I have one on the rectifier, right there, and then I have one here on one of the tubes. And these are 1 volt tubes. So the one this is a 1H5 tube. And the way that this radio works is the voltage that comes out of the rectifier on pin 8, which is right here, goes through a voltage divider, and it goes up to the filaments of these 1 volt tubes. And it comes up as about 6 volts. And it gets distributed in series, just like Christmas light bulbs, to 1.5 volts for each tube. In other words, if you take one tube out, radio doesn't work. All right? So that's what we're going to be looking for. So we've got this thing all connected. On the rectifier tube, I'm measuring on pin 8, and I'll show you on the schematic right here. Pin 8 comes out of the rectifier tube. And the second tube that we're measuring right here is the 1H5. And we're measuring that on pin 2, right here. Okay? And you'll see pin 2 goes to pin 7 of the next tube. And it also comes down here and goes to the 1T5. So we've got it plugged in. I have an antenna connected. I'm going to power it up. And let's see what comes out of it. Now this is an old battery set, so it doesn't come up quickly. It takes a little bit of time for it to come up. But you're going to see our B plus here before it gets reduced. And you're going to see our filament voltage for our 1 volt tubes there. You can see our B plus maybe starting to come up. I can see the filament light there. Here comes our B plus.
Like, what is he thinking?
And we have audio.
What is he thinking about Bridgewater?
Let's turn the volume down. So our B plus is coming in at 126. So what this means is we're coming out of the rectifier tube at 126, and then we're going through this 2.5K resistor and going up to the radio. And what the radio expects to see is 90 volts on the B plus. And I did measure that. I am getting 90 volts. So we've got 126 coming out of the rectifier. And over here on pin 2 of our 1H5 tube, we've got 5.6 volts. So that's about right. Again, we have to divide by 4, right? So the voltages are right there. With these tubes, you don't want to exceed, 1.5 volts. So you want to keep the voltage down to about 1.2. And I think that's right about where we are. So we're about 1.2, 1.3. So we're able to light up these tubes safely. And we're obviously running B plus here really well, and we have great audio.
What's happening? You got Deshaun Watson on your mind?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. First of all, though, it's interesting.
Okay, you get the idea. I didn't do any alignment on this radio. Right out of the box, it works. I am going to fine-tune it and tweak it, and we will make sure that it's running effectively. But that's where we are. So having these vector tube sockets really helps because you can measure voltages without running wires underneath the chassis and all kinds of stuff. And you can move the pins around to measure other things. If I wanted to, I could measure AC on pin 5. That's where our AC line voltage comes in. And I won't do that now because I'll have to mess around there. But that's what we could do. The radio itself works great. The volume control is great. I just have to, cut the shaft correctly, and it'll be okay. But this radio is effectively working. So let's go through the schematic and determine how exactly this radio works, just so all of you learn something, because I learned something when I was doing this. Let me turn this off. Okay, we'll wait for our capacitors to drain. Okay, there we go. Let's unplug it. And I'll come back with a shot on the schematic, and we'll talk about the schematic for a minute. We'll be right back. Okay, so let's talk about the schematic. So you heard me say earlier that our AC comes in. Here's our capacitor, our fan capacitor that we put in. So this is effectively taking our line voltage and reducing it down, getting it into the rectifier tube, and comes out here. I think we measured 126 volts. Okay, and from here it goes through this 2.5K resistor up to this B plus rail right here. See, it's marked 90 volts. Okay, so we're good. But it also goes through this voltage divider. So we have a 2.5K resistor here. We have a 2K resistor here at 10 watts. And we have another 400 ohm resistor at 1 watt. And this is our voltage divider. And what happens right here is our voltage comes out and goes up and feeds our filament. So this is our filament. It's going between this 2K and this 400 ohm resistor right here. And you'll see here it's coming out at 6 volts. Now, when I was first testing this radio, I didn't have all the tubes, because the radio didn't come with tubes, all of them anyway. So what I did was I put one of my Vector tube sockets on there, powered it up. I was getting half a volt. I'm like, where's my filament voltage? Right? So I tried it, I changed sockets, I checked all my connections, all my wires, still was only getting half a volt. So my first inclination was, well, I changed all this, so let me change this resistor right here, which is 600 ohms. This drops off all the excess current that we don't need for our tubes. So I put a decade box, I removed that resistor, which is right here. I put a decade box on there. And I think this is 600 here. I ended up with 100 ohms, and I started getting like 1.5 volts on that socket. I'm like, all right, that's great. We just have to adjust that. But then, of course, before I did anything, I spoke to Brendan, because that's what I do when I'm not sure what I'm doing. And I went to Brendan, and Brendan goes, well, Ron, you need to have all the tubes installed, because these are all in series, like Christmas lights. So put all your tubes in, and then check your voltages and make sure everything's good. And lo and behold, of course, you put all the tubes in, and everything's working great. Now, why did I miss that? Well, I'm not used to working on, first of all, battery radios. This is a battery radio, and battery radios are very different, right? They were built to conserve power, right? Batteries were relatively expensive back then. And, the last thing that you want to do is you want to have your 6-volt battery, which is one of the batteries, your A battery, that drives your filaments. You don't want to drive that down because the radio doesn't work. And then this thing also had a pair of 45-volt dry cell batteries, which provided the B+. So the set was designed to be minimally draining on the power source. That's why it takes so long to come up as well. So I made that mistake when I was testing it out, because I didn't want to pop these tubes, because these tubes pop really easy. You throw 2 volts on one of these, you're going to pop the filament, right? It's a fuse, essentially. So I didn't want to do that, so I was trying to be safe, and I thought I was being smart by only testing one bulb, but of course I wasn't. So with all the tubes installed, our measurements are perfect. So, in theory, this radio is complete. We're ready to go. I'm going to work on the case. I'm not going to do that in a video. You all know what a case looks like, and I'm not going to bore you with that. So what did we learn working on this radio? Well, first thing we learned is you can avoid a lot of heat on an AC set with no transformer by removing this dropping resistor. In this case, it was 560 ohms, and replace it with a fan capacitor, which is capacitive reactance. And remember, we spoke about that in the first video, and that proved to be exactly what we need. Okay? And then we also learned that by having a voltage divider here, and by having all your tubes installed, you're able to measure the voltage correctly and make sure it's right. So we know that this process worked really well. And this was a relatively simple radio to work on, so there wasn't a lot of stuff in here. A handful of capacitors and a handful of resistors. So this radio's done. We're finished. So what's next? Well, I have two things that I could work on next. I have another FATA radio, which I started and then abandoned a couple of months ago because I got busy. It's a little bit more complex than this one, so I'm going to work on that one. I don't know if I'll do a series on it yet. I also have another Thunderbird 1966 T-Bird radio to work on. If you remember, I told you I got one really inexpensive, and I'm going to restore that one. So I'm going to work on that one. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to do it on camera. But I also want to show you something else that I've been working on. So let me get that, and we'll wrap up this video. Okay, and here it is. So what you're looking at here is the Statue of Liberty. It's a Lego architecture kit. It's 1,600 something pieces, and this was a gift for my birthday from my brother. And it's really, really cool because it teaches you a little bit about how these things were built. I'm sure it's not exactly to spec, but you can see it's a really cool build. A lot of small pieces. It's pretty good. This arm moves. You can adjust it. And it's got the entire base of the statue. Here's the back. There's the book. Again. Of course, they don't give you a face, so I could paste somebody's face on there. But this is a really cool thing to do too. So if you're interested in doing like things like this, it's just a good diversion. It keeps you busy, keeps your mind active, and it's called the Lego Architecture Kit. So this was fun to build too. This will be a nice little piece to have around the house. There's the flame. So hope you enjoyed that, and that's going to be it for now. I'll have another video coming up soon with my next adventure, and there will be more. I've got plenty of things to work on. So until then, we will see you. Take care.